Welcome back to Zestology. It's the podcast all about energy, vitality and motivation. It's a cold one outside. And so, for the second week in a row, I've come inside. I know, I'm a bit of a wuss. Don't judge me. I will do the cryotherapy sessions as promised in punishment for being inside. Because normally I like to kind of walk out and about around London, but I'm inside today. So today on Zestology, it's all about tracking. Tracking is something that I've spoken about for a while on Zestology. I'm a firm believer, if there's something not quite right in your life, if you've got a bit of data to analyse, you can try and figure it out. So on the days you're not feeling so good, what's different? Did you have breakfast? Didn't you have breakfast? Did you meditate or not? Did you sleep badly or did you sleep well? And a lot of people ask me how they can track their own health and wellness with more in-depth testing. What are the markers you should look out for and how can you interpret the results? So today, in part 2 of my interview with the wonderful Beth O'Hara, who is just so awesome in so many ways, and I urge you to check out her website as well, which she mentions in this podcast, we look at what 2 tests would be a great idea to take, and then I take the tests, and then she interprets the results. So this is the kind of thing, if you really want to get in depth, and this podcast can never be accused of not going in depth, right? You get the right tests to take, and they're not going to be particularly cheap, and then you get someone good like Beth to analyse them. So let's see what she finds as she interprets my results. Here she is, Beth O'Hara on Zestology. Beth O'Hara is back for double podcast number 2. How you doing, Beth?
I'm doing great, Tony. How are you doing?
Good, very good, thank you. So last week we talked about allergies in general, and one of the things that you love to do is look at tests, get data, be as kind of scientific and as rigorous as possible about the way that you treat people. And I found a lot of people say to me, actually, I know it'd be quite a good idea in this day and age to do some preventative testing of some description or kind of try and work out what's going on, but I don't know where to go. So what do you recommend people who want to just maybe kind of dip a toe in the water and do a little bit of testing on their health and performance levels in some way?
Yeah, I do. I have some good recommendations here. And the reason this is so important, I want to tell people first why this is so important, is to figure out what's triggering your health issues. You have to know what's underneath. And to address health issues, we have to know what's underneath that's triggering it. So anything from immune issues, autoimmunity, mast cell activation syndrome, histamine intolerance, sleep issues, chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, you name it, I always tell people those aren't the problem. It's what's triggering the expression of those things that are the problem. And in my own case, my own health, and I shared my story last time, what took me from being completely knocked flat, debilitated, and having to use a cane to be able to walk, to having my life back and my health back and my energy back and be able to work full time and go on hikes, what turned that around was getting the right testing, the right data, because after seeing 50 healthcare practitioners, nobody was running the right tests. They just didn't know what to run. And a lot of my regular lab work was normal. And they would tell me, well, you look really healthy. And I'd say, well, why am I barely able to walk in here on a cane and I'm so exhausted? So the 2 that I use as my entry point for everyone is genetic testing, and what I really like these days is called Your Genomic Resource. That's the kit. It's an at-home saliva kit. It has to be ordered through a practitioner, but it's the best kit that we have for these kinds of chronic health conditions and the best reporting. So if you get that kit, right now the reporting is over 90 pages of health-related variants. So that's one of the absolute top on the market without sequencing your entire genome, which gets expensive. So that option is out there, Your Genomic Resource. And if you go to their website, if you look up Your Genomic Resource, you'll see a list of practitioners that use that. That's what I use in my practice. The second best would be 23andMe, but the reason I moved away from that one is just that they were purchased by GlaxoSmithKline a couple years ago, and they dropped 7,000 of the 10,000 variants that I look at with people. So we can use that if that's what people have, or if they have version 4 like you had, Tony. That's really helpful because that had the most data before they switched the kit.
So I sent you my 23, and everyone's heard of 23andMe.
Yeah. And you sent me version 4. So
I did it ages ago before they were bought by GlaxoSmithKline. I mean, I'm not really that keen on it. Not that I've got anything against one particular company, but big pharmaceutical companies and data and testing and the natural kind of health world might not necessarily seem to be natural bedfellows, I suppose.
Well, that's the reason they dropped so many variants, is they went in the direction of drug research, which is what works for their company. What I like about your genomic resource also is that they don't store the samples, so nobody can get access to it again. Everything's HIPAA compliant. They never sell data. They never share data, so it's completely secure. And you can use an anonymous, or like a pen name. You can use a different name if you prefer, so that it's not trackable to you for some people that are worried about that, but it's completely secure. So I use that. That's the lab. That's the genetics that I recommend for everyone at this point. But if they have 23andMe, it can work with it. And then the other thing that everybody runs is called an organic acid test. And there are a couple companies that run this. So Genova has one. Great Plains has one. I really like Great Plains because they have a few specific markers that aren't on any of the others. So that's what we ran for you, Tony.
Yeah.
And this is 70 plus markers. It's an at-home urine kit, so it's easy to do, which is what's nice about it. You don't have to go to a lab site, and you just do it at home. It's got a whole page of intestinal markers that have to do with yeast and fungal and bacterial growth or overgrowth in the gut. It's got markers on oxalates, which are unique to this, and oxalates can cause histamine and mast cell issues. It has markers on energy production, which is so important for performance and just having enough energy in general in life. It has neurotransmitter markers. It has some markers that deal with methylation. And it also looks at how you're metabolizing your fats, your carbs, and your proteins, and are you turning those into energy. It's got a few nutrient markers and even some detoxification markers. So this is such a great general panel for people as a starting point. And then any recommendations I make above and beyond that is based on each case. But everybody has these when they come in.
Okay. And so today's podcast is, if you think about doing that and think about taking some testing, those are the tests that I've done, and you've got the results in front of them, and you can kind of look through them. And perhaps a starting point is looking at some of the health issues that I've gone through. I mean, actually, I'm feeling pretty good at the moment, and part of it is because I've kind of got into this whole histamine world over the last 6 months, which is probably the reason that we've met and we're talking on this podcast today. But is that a good start to kind of look at some symptoms and then look at what you've drawn out of the tests?
Yeah, let's do that. So I'm basically going to step you through the process I do with my clients.
Yeah, you take over. You take over, Beth.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. This is when we have this kind of data back. What do we do with it? And so I'm going to step through what do we do with yours, Tony, which would be different with how I would talk about someone else's because they're going to have different markers. But This gives a really good example of why these are important, what we do with them. So you emailed me, Tony, that you've had, you called it a dodgy gut for 25 years. It would be really...
Is dodgy a word that you're familiar with in America?
I'm familiar with dodgy because I have some British friends.
Oh, okay. It's a British word. It suddenly occurred to me that dodgy, you might not know what it means. But anyway, dodgy gut. Yeah.
I love that word, dodgy.
Okay, good.
So, and you tried a bunch of different diets, but even the diets would make you feel... sometimes make you feel bad, and this kind of got sparked. So it's been there for a while, but after living in Italy, you had a bad gut there, and you started getting bad knees around age 17. That's really young, Tony.
Yeah. No, it was pretty young. I started having bad knees. I had a knee operation at age 20 to try and sort it out.
Now, were you an athlete at that time? Was there a lot of wear and tear on your knees?
Enthusiastic rather than kind of professional level athlete. I was doing lots of sport, but that was curtailing my ability to really enjoy it. I'd play. We love our soccer over here, our football,
Yes.
but my knees would always hurt after playing football, for example. So, yeah.
And even with being an enthusiastic athlete, that's still so young.
Yeah.
So one of the things on my mind is, what are the sources of potential inflammation? Anything that causes inflammation will increase mast cell activation.
Right.
So that's one of the things on my mind. Oxalates can contribute to joint issues, especially early. I'm going to look at a few other inflammatory areas. And then you said that you were traveling in the Philippines in 2014 and you got a virus.
Yes.
And you were off work for 3 months. Can you tell me?
Yeah, sorry, carry on.
Well, can you tell me more about what you were experiencing with that virus? Like you mentioned these light neurological symptoms like some pressure in your forehead, but what happened in those 3 months?
Well, first of all, that's the reason this podcast exists, because, I had all this time off work, and I remember thinking, the one thing I don't have is energy. So if and when I get back to, approaching full energy, it would be lovely to do a podcast on energy, because again, there's a lot of Dr. Google involved, and I realised that all sorts of people suffer from different levels of kind of stress around their kind of energy, vitality and motivation levels. So that was why I wanted to do the podcast. Partly selfish reasons and partly to help people. I was in the Philippines and started off, I just one day just noticed this rash on part of my body, and thought it might be sunburn, but it wasn't. And then started to get a weird numb patches on my forehead and didn't feel very well. Went to the doctor over there who said I had measles, which I don't think I did, but I had some kind of virus he could tell from my red blood cell count. And then came back, the neurological symptoms continued, and I just didn't really have any energy, and I spent a couple of months in bed really, and 3 months off work from Sky, and then really it took me about a year to get back to kind of approaching full energy. But when I went to the neurologist quite a few times, and they just said, look, these kind of neurological symptoms, when you've had a virus and modern medicine can't diagnose that virus, often you get some kind of a post-viral neurological symptoms which we can't explain, and they eventually go away.
Okay, but you still have some of them.
I do, yeah.
Which tells me that at this point, we've got a really good panel that just came out this year called a Neural Zoomer.
Okay.
And that's a panel that looks at all kinds of things that can be going on with the neurological system. So that's something I'm going to flag here for you just based on your case history. And then I'll send you some notes here with some recommendations. But we could look at that, and it includes a viral panel of viruses that may still be in your system that affect the nervous system. And there is a lot that you can do to support the nervous system with these kind of neurological viruses.
Okay, yeah.
And see, anytime we're fighting off a chronic infection, we're going to have higher histamine levels, because those mast cells, as we talked about last time, they produce over 200 different inflammatory molecules as part of the immune response. The most well-known one is histamine. So we have to be thinking about what's under the surface here for this histamine intolerance, and possibly some mild mast cell activation syndrome. I'm not sure with you.
Okay.
So we have this going on. You've mentioned inflamed joints, particularly sore knees, sometimes back, restless legs at night.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So thinking about restless legs at night, has anybody checked a copper iron panel for you?
I had a fairly comprehensive panel a few years ago, but I'm not sure since then.
Okay.
I can have a look, but not specifically.
Yeah. Okay, so those would be ones we could follow up on there.
Yeah.
There's copper, iron, and magnesium. And then you talked about hive-like bumps on your hands and feet in hot weather. So that is starting to sound like some mast cell activation syndrome.
Yeah. Oh, that has been years and years, and that has got better this year.
Yeah. And you've been lowering your histamine load with the supplements you're taking and diet. And so that kind of heat trigger, that's can be a mast cell kind of syndrome.
Oh, yeah, totally worse when it's hot. Yeah.
Okay. And then we've got some sleep disruptions, especially towards the end of the night, jerking, restless. And what's interesting is, I don't know if this is exactly what's going on with your sleep yet, because there's still a lot more details about that. But we have our highest histamine levels around 3 to 4 in the morning.
Right.
So we have a histamine dump. So people might eat higher histamine during the day, or sometimes it's not even the foods. It could be you had a heat exposure and maybe a stressful meeting or a stressful drive home and busy traffic, and you taken your walk, and you talked last time about walking through an area with a lot of exhaust from vehicles, and things like that. And so even that can trigger that histamine dump at night. So I get a lot of my clients have that 3 a.m., 4 a.m. waking or sleep disturbance. So how long has that been going on for you, Tony?
I mean, I think it's got worse over the last few years. And I don't know if I told you in the email, but because you sent me an email and asked about kind of symptoms, didn't you? I almost stumbled upon by accident something that might be quite an interesting bit of information for you, which is that a couple of months ago, I had a bit of a dodgy gut in the middle of the night, and I couldn't find any charcoal tablets, which I think is normally kind of, quite a helpful thing to take. But I could find some quercetin tablets in the middle, so kind of half asleep, bleary-eyed. I thought, I'll take a quercetin tablet, and I just had the best night's sleep, the best second part of the night's sleep that I've ever had. And since then, if I get up to go to the loo in the middle of the night, I'll take a quercetin tablet every night, and it massively improves the second half of the night. Now, I'm not sure if that's the right thing to do with the Beth O'Hara approach, but it seems to be working for me really quite well. It just occurs to me that probably does tie in with what you're saying about histamine levels at 3 and 4 in the morning.
Exactly. So my philosophy is, if it works, it works.
Yeah.
And if you're taking quercetin and that's helping, that gives us a big clue that that's a histamine related response or related issue with the sleep. So you've landed on some really great things here. And then the last thing that you sent me was that you're type A overstimulated. So that's the other thing I want to hit on, and that you notice that it's affected by your physical health. And there is a big gut mood and gut nervous system connection, because 90% of our serotonin, which is a feel-good neurotransmitter, 90% is made in the gut. It's not even made in the brain. Only 10% is made in the brain.
Yeah.
And serotonin becomes melatonin and helps us with sleep.
Yeah. And I mean, I certainly am type A. And, I've been telling you about this new history. I'm really interested in the world of histamine intolerance and looking at setting up a website to help people, and doing this podcast and having a new baby and, a full-time job at the same time. So there's a lot going on.
There is, yeah.
Yeah, and there's been times in my life when I have probably been more, just generally more chilled out and been doing less than I am at the moment.
Well, we see some evidence of what you're describing in the organic acid test. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start with your genetics and just talk about a couple of things we're seeing here in the genetics that are related to the things we're discussing for you. So just kind of the brief summary is we're looking at...
So I've pulled up the report that you sent me earlier so I can look at it on my screen at the same time.
Yes, so we can look at it together.
Yeah.
So just our general summary for people is that we're looking at histamine reactions, got some neurological symptoms, and the feeling overstimulated type A.
Yeah, okay.
So
I mean, part of me quite likes being type A, but I quite like being kind of type B at times as well, just chilling out a bit more.
Well, you want to be able to modulate back and forth. So I'll talk more when we get to that part of the organic acid test, but type A can help you accomplish quite a bit.
Yes.
And you've done so much in your life and with your life for people. And so we don't want to get rid of that. We just want to give you a little ability to flip the switch when you want to.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. So let's talk about the histamine intolerance piece. So when we look at your report, and the first part of it has some gut markers. So those ones that say HLA, KIAA 1109. tend to be related to gluten intolerance. Now, my guess is you probably are off of gluten anyway.
Yeah.
What's interesting is you don't have much in the way of variance there.
Okay.
And we go down to the FUT2 section, and that's on your page 3.
And just for people wondering why she really off a lot of initials, these are the different imaginatively titled names of the genes. They haven't all got kind of sexy names, have they? It tends to be kind of initials and numbers, letters and numbers, basically.
Right. Well, they actually have really long names that are hard to pronounce. And so somebody was nice enough to give them abbreviations that are easier to pronounce.
Why aren't they called kind of Dandelion Field or something like that? That'd be quite easy to remember. But
that's a good question. Yeah. We'll have to take that up with the whoever named
with the relevant authorities, the gene authorities. But sorry, so anyway, FUT2 gene, I've got quite a lot of variants there, haven't I?
You do. You have some single variants here, though. So let me orient people to how genetics work in case they're not as familiar. So in most genes, we receive one copy from mom, one copy from dad. Not everything. There's actually a small handful of genes we only get from mom. But most we get one copy from mom, one from dad. And if we have two of what's called the normal copy, you'll say there's 0 variants. So it's just you have 2 normal copies. If you have a single normal copy and a single copy that's a variant, meaning it's different from the normal, that can potentially change the gene expression. And if you get 2 variant copies, then we say you have 2 variants, or they'll say that's a homozygous mutation versus a single variant is a heterozygous. So I usually just go with single or double variants in terms of talking about these things. In general, double variants have more of an impact than single variants. However, it also depends on which set of genes we're talking about. And so in these FUT2 genes, and this is part of the analysis part, is knowing which ones are more relevant, which ones affect people more or less, and so on. In these FUT2 genes, having these single variants like you have is very common.
Okay.
And you see on your report, you can see can you see the percentiles? Does it have percentiles for you?
Yes, I can. Yeah.
Okay. So that's giving you, on this report, behind this software that I use for the genetic analysis, we have data on over 35,000 people with health issues. And this tells you how common that variant is in the population. Okay. So you can see those are pretty common. They're all around 50%. One's about 24%.
Right.
So this is actually not bad at all. This FUT2 gene, the reason I'm looking at this with you is because of the gut issues. And FUT2 codes for the lining of the gut to be a hospitable environment for beneficial bacteria, particularly bifido. And also it contributes to immune health, digestion, neurotransmitters, and so on. So it's an important one to look at. And yours actually looks pretty good.
Okay.
And what's interesting is when I go down and look at the variants that affect histamine levels, like we go to that ABP1.
Yes.
That's the gene name. That's what codes for the diamine oxidase enzyme that a lot of people know about with histamine intolerance.
Yes.
Because that breaks down histamine in the gut. You don't have any variants there at all.
Okay.
And then we go down to the HNMT part. That's the other major. So there's no point in me taking,
sorry to interrupt, there's no point in me taking diamine oxidase supplements then because they're not going to work.
Oh, nope, don't go there yet.
Oh, okay, sorry.
So, yeah, so, and that leads me to something I should have said before, which is our genetics are only a predisposition. It's like a blueprint for our bodies, but it's not diagnostic, these genes that we're looking at. And so they tell us where you have predispositions or weaknesses. And it's a big part of why people could have the same root causes. So you could have 5 people with Lyme and mold toxicity, and they all present in a different way because it depends on our genetic predispositions, how things are expressed. However, we can also have functional issues, which means that it's not a genetic problem, it's a problem with a cofactor, like a nutrient cofactor or an infection or something like that that's outside of the genetics. So we always have to look at what's called epigenetics. And this is how the epigenetics just means how the genetic expression is happening, what's happening with expression of the genes, because I tell people you can have the genes are the blueprint. And if you have a blueprint for building, the builder could come in, read the blueprint exactly, and replicate the mistakes that happen in the blueprint. The builder could come in, read the blueprint, catch, oh, that's an error there in the kitchen, so I'm going to fix it. And so in gene expression, errors in the blueprint can be fixed. Or in gene expression, the builder can look at the blueprint could be correct, but make errors in the expression, make errors in the building of the kitchen.
Okay.
Now here's the tricky thing about diamine oxidase. You don't have any genetic variants. So genetically, there shouldn't be a problem there. However, when we get to your organic acid test, we're going to see that you do have some markers dealing with the gut, and you had these gut issues that came up in life, but they weren't with you early on. And so you probably have a secondary histamine intolerance is where I'm going.
Right.
So most diamine oxidase is made in the gut lining, and if the gut lining is inflamed, you're not going to be able to make it. So until the gut gets healed, you may still need to take diamine oxidase. But this is why I said this histamine intolerance may be reversible for you.
Okay. That's exciting.
Isn't that exciting?
Yeah.
So especially without having any of the variants. And this is what Jean said, that even a single variant I find affects people here in that diamine oxidase. So I really pay attention to that. But you have 0.
Yeah, okay.
So that's really good news. So some more gut healing might make a big difference, and you might be back to eating chocolate.
Oh, perfect. And avocado.
No, I can't guarantee that you can have wine and cheese and a beer and chocolate all on the same day. But I think we could definitely get you back to eating chocolate.
Awesome. Okay, that sounds good.
And then the other big gene that's important to look at with histamine intolerance is HNMT.
Okay.
And that stands for histamine N-methyltransferase. You see why we just call it HNMT.
Yeah.
But that's another way of breaking down histamine that's dependent on methylation. And you do have a couple double variants in there, but not more than the average. You can see that actually those double variants are really common in this population.
Okay.
And I don't think that that's a genetic place either. So where I would go next for you, Tony, is more checking the gut in more depth and working on gut healing and checking methylation and making sure that that's working so that we have these two major pathways working right.
Right.
Okay. So let's just take that piece because that's just a snapshot. Now, when I do genetic analysis, I'm looking at over 10,000. But if we just look at those, and then let's go over to your organic acid test and look at the gut markers.
Okay, so this is the P test that I did.
Yeah.
Yes.
This is the at-home urine test that you did. And that first page, we have all of the gut markers. And so we look at markers 1 through 9 for you. So we're on that Great Plains organic acid test. And if somebody wants to follow along, you can actually look up a Great Plains organic acid test separate sample report, and you could follow along on these markers. So on Tony's, we're looking at markers 1 through 9. We don't have any elevations here, and those are for yeast and fungal markers. So we're not seeing any overgrowth of yeast or fungus in your gut, which is great. And actually the Candida marker, which is number 7, I almost always see that above the range, and yours is in the range.
Okay.
So that's really good.
Great. Well, that's good.
Yeah. So now we get down to the bacterial part.
Yeah. Which maybe isn't quite so good. I can see one very, very high marker there.
Yes. So I always ask people on that number 10 that you're looking at, the hypuric. That one can be thrown off if you ate grapes, pears, cranberries, or blueberries before this test. Did you happen to eat any of those? Let's see, apples, grapes, pears, and cranberries is what we're looking at.
You sent me a list of what not to eat in the 2 days beforehand, and I didn't eat those.
Okay, good. So
that said, I do eat a lot of blueberries. Did you mention blueberries then or not?
I did, but I don't think that's not contradictory for the test.
Yeah. I definitely stuck to what you said.
Okay.
Yeah. So, but
Okay.
I mean, if blueberries were involved, Beth, I probably did eat quite a lot of them.
Okay.
Yeah.
The lab just tells you not to have grapes, pears, apples, or cranberries.
Okay.
And so if you follow the instructions, that tells
Yes,
us,
I
I
did,
always
yeah.
check because they can throw that marker off. If
Yeah.
you follow the instructions, this should be reliable. So then that's telling us that can mean one of two things, either a detox challenge or bacterial overgrowth. So that's a marker that can refer to either of them. But then when we look at 14 and 16 for you,
Okay.
are you taking any probiotics?
Yeah, I do. I take the Probiota Histamine X
Okay.
probiotic. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So then that may be why that beneficial bacteria is a little elevated. So I'm not worried about that since you're taking a probiotic.
Just interrupting this podcast for one moment to remind you that it's brought to you by Sunlighten Saunas, an ultra-low EMF sauna with Netflix in it. Does it get any better? It's really nice for these winter days, get into the sauna, and what I love about the infrared sauna is it's all backed up by a rigorous amount of scientific research that shows that it is excellent for everything from heart health and heart rate variability to detox and relaxation. I've certainly found with my Oura Ring stats that my sleep gets a lot better and deeper, and my heart rate variability seems to get better as well, and I can also feel myself detox in it. I'm actually not going in the sauna for that long at the moment because I'm taking it slowly, because I can tell that it's working and I don't want to over detox, if that makes sense. Yeah, it's just so great to have the Sunlighten sauna, and it's an especially good hack in winter, I think. Mention Zestology to get $200 or £200 off at Sunlighten Saunas. And now back to the show.
When we look at 16, though, I think this is one of our big ones. So that last set of markers has to do with Clostridia overgrowth in the gut.
Oh dear, that doesn't sound good.
Well, there's many different kinds of Clostridia. So most people have heard of the C. diff, which can be really bad and contribute to significant digestive issues and diarrhea. But yours is number 16. It's a little more general for different kinds of Clostridia. And so it's elevated. It's not hugely elevated, but some elevated. So this is why I say I think we do a little more gut follow-up for you.
Okay.
And find out what's going on here with your gut. So this is cluing us in that there's something going on with bacterial overgrowth in your gut.
Yeah.
And like I said before, that will lead to lower diamine oxidase. The good news is addressing it and supporting your gut healing can bring that diamine oxidase back on board, and you may not need so much, and you might be able to expand your foods.
And diamine oxidase helps break down histamine in the body.
It does, yes.
Yeah,
and our bodies make it in the gut. It's really fortunate that we can take it as a supplement if we don't have enough.
Yeah.
But some people, like I have a lot of genetic variants for histamine intolerance, and that can lead to mast cell issues on the genetic level. And in my history that I told you about before, I had issues very young. And so that requires oftentimes more extensive protocol than what we're seeing in you with minimal genetic variants and onset later in life. So a good analogy is it's easier to turn around a rowboat than a cruise ship. So my health's been a cruise ship. I think your health is more like a rowboat or a speedboat. So I think we can get it turned around.
Yeah.
And
Well, I feel very grateful for that. I feel sorry for you, though, being the cruise ship, but I feel very grateful that I'm the rowboat.
It's good to be a rowboat.
It is good to be a rowboat. Yeah.
I've learned a lot being a cruise ship.
Yeah. I want to be a rowboat, not a speedboat.
Okay. Well, I'll give you rowboat.
Okay.
So that's our histamine intolerance kind of section in our gut section. Do you have any questions there, Tony?
No, that seems fairly self-explanatory. I mean, obviously, some markers in the gut that need looking at, and I'm sure you'll go into that with what you could do about that.
Yeah, I'm going to actually send you some custom follow-up test recommendations.
Okay.
Based on what we're seeing here, and then those would give the information on where to go in and how to build a protocol for you.
Okay, brilliant.
Okay.
And then further down the organic acid test, do you look at that as well? Because there were some things that I saw there and I was like, wow, I am high on the scale for a couple of other things there.
I do. I look at the whole thing, and I look at so many more genetics than we have time to talk about today, but that's why I'm just going to hit on the highlights here.
Okay.
So your oxalate markers look pretty good.
Okay.
Now, the tricky thing on oxalates is that oxalates can hide in the tissues, and so you don't always you get a false elevation. But I was wondering if that could be involved in your joint issues. That was one of my concerns.
Yeah.
And however, when I look at your oxalate markers, you do have some significant markers on one called it's called HOGA1, HOGA1, that could contribute to increased production of oxalates. So that's something to keep an eye on, and it makes me suspicious that we might be seeing a false negative here, basically, on the oxalates. So that's something I'm going to flag here in my notes for you, is the knee pain and early issues an oxalate issue. And I'll send you some notes on how we can look into that, because I don't want to take up all our time with that, because that's a whole topic in itself.
I think I'm sure at some point I did look at a low oxalate diet. Mm-hmm. I mean, it wasn't that long ago. I didn't think it made that much difference.
Okay.
Am I right in saying sweet potatoes are quite high oxalate?
Exactly. Sweet potato, spinach, beets, Swiss chard, rhubarb, almonds. These are our highest oxalate foods. And many people, that's actually what caused my significant joint pain and why I was on a cane. And it did help me. But it's good. That's good feedback that it didn't make a difference for you.
No, I mean I know that I don't really like eating spinach. Spinach doesn't agree with me, but sweet potatoes seem fine. So I remember giving up all that list for a while, and then thinking, I didn't think it made that much difference.
So just with all of the 2s here, the double variants that we have for you, the general recommendation here for this one is just to really be careful on the highest oxalate foods, because this can contribute to increased risk of kidney stones, which you definitely don't want. That's awful.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. So then we go down, and what we've got is a whole set of energy markers, energy flow, where fats, carbs, and proteins turn into the ATP, the energy for the cell. And these are all looking pretty good, Tony. Nothing significantly elevated. We've got a couple things on the lower end of the range, though. So we see particularly 28 and 29. And I'm just wondering if that might be a cofactor issue with maybe not quite enough B vitamins or not quite enough magnesium. So that's something I've flagged to follow up on.
Yeah, and I mean, I can't remember if I told you when you asked for kind of symptoms, but one of the things I really struggle with is methylated vitamins always make me feel a bit nauseous, so I have to go very, very slowly on it. So that might well be relevant there.
Although that is very relevant. So that'll be one more thing that we'll take a peek at will be your methylation variants here, and see if you have a tendency towards overmethylation. But before we get there, let's look at the neurotransmitter variants, or the neurotransmitter markers. So 35 through 37.
Yes.
And you see that elevation on 33 in dopamine.
Okay, so 33, it says dopamine there. That is my dopamine levels, which is outside the range. What does that mean exactly?
So it's not a direct marker for dopamine. We don't have a direct way, but it's measuring an indirect marker that indicates dopamine levels. It means we see, and dopamine gets converted to norepinephrine, epinephrine. And so we have an indirect marker for that too. Another word for epinephrine and norepinephrine is adrenaline, which gives us energy.
Yeah.
And so what can happen when you have, what we're seeing with you is elevated dopamine, low norepinephrine, epinephrine. And so that can give you, dopamine gives you motivation, and people with high dopamine are usually type A, high achieving.
Yeah, okay. Now I'm working it out.
Yeah, and then when you have high dopamine that's not converting properly to the norepinephrine, epinephrine, or adrenaline, you feel like a racehorse at the gate. Do you ever feel that way? Like you have all these things you want to do, but you don't have quite the energy to run the 10 laps around the track.
Yeah, or like I always should be doing more.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting is there are a few things that can affect that conversion. And so the first thing that I do is I go back to your genetics here, and I'm going to look at your variants that can affect that conversion. And it's an enzyme called dopamine beta hydroxylase, and we call it DBH. So dopamine beta hydroxylase. You have some variants in there, but not a whole lot more than average.
Okay.
So it may not be a genetic issue. What's also interesting is it's vitamin C dependent, it's copper dependent, and you do have a lot of variants in the copper pathway. So that's why I suggest checking copper. It's also downregulated by Clostridia bacteria.
Okay.
So one of the questions I have for you is, did you feel that like this before you went to Italy, when you were younger than that?
Did I feel like I had, did I feel type A?
Type A, tons of drive, but not enough energy to make the 10 laps around the track.
I'm not sure. Maybe not.
Okay.
No.
So I was just wondering if that Clostridia affected this for a long time. So if we can get this a little more in balance for you, you can still have the drive and also the energy to get done what you want to do.
Well, that sounds perfect. Yeah.
Wouldn't that be nice?
Oh, lovely. Yeah.
So to follow this up, we have to work on your gut and that Clostridia that we're seeing. Check your vitamin C, check your copper. Just check. We're checking everything that affects that pathway.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so there's that piece, and then I think we'll jump down.
So you're saying, I mean, just on that Italy thing that we mentioned, just for a bit. I went to Italy and lived there for 7 or 8 months, I think, and I did get a very bad gut there, and it actually affected my gut for a few months afterwards. I remember like eating food and always having cramps afterwards. But of course, this was the early 1990s, and you just kind of got on with it, and there wasn't the information out there to do anything about it anyway. So maybe that was a piece of the puzzle.
Right. So I'm kind of wondering if some of these things got set up back then.
Maybe.
And you've kind of lived with them and accepted them, and then you got ill again in the Philippines about 5 years ago, and so that may have triggered another layer of this.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So then we come down, the folate metabolism markers look good. This is how folate turns into DNA and RNA.
Okay.
And then the next section we have, this is how our fats turn into energy. Or if these markers are elevated, it means the fats are oxidizing. And you have just one that's elevated. We'll see this elevated when people do more of a ketogenic diet. Do you tend to do that?
Well, it's funny actually, because I did for a couple of years, and I'm not at the moment. I'm for the last 9 months or so, I've just been eating, a regular amount of carbs. But I do intermittent fast, and I do definitely in the morning get a kind of real burst of energy there. So probably a mild ketones there, and I do get very, very thirsty. So I'm sure that there is a bit of ketosis going on still, even though I am eating quite a lot of carbs.
Somebody who's doing active ketogenic diet, and we have an elevation there.
Sorry, just say that again, Beth. You just cut out for one moment then.
When we have an elevation in these markers that we're looking at, which is the grouping 43 through 49,
okay,
regarding fatty acid metabolism, how we metabolize our fats. If somebody's not actively doing a ketogenic diet, and we have the kind of elevation we're seeing here for you, which is just a little elevated, it's not, sometimes I see these in the hundreds.
Wow.
Yours is just, the upper range is 1.9, you're at 5.8.
Yeah.
It's usually an indicator that we need a little more carnitine. And so the recommendation there is acetyl L-carnitine. Carnitine is what the body uses to shuttle the fats into the cells to make energy from the fats.
Yeah. Wow.
And so that's why carnitine is an energy and performance and also a metabolism supplement.
Okay.
So we're just seeing a little need there.
I mean, I know you're writing it down, but I was just writing down L-carnitine as well. Is it L-carnitine or carnitine?
I actually like to use acetyl L-carnitine, and the
Okay.
reason is that acetyl part supports another pathway called acetylation, which is also a histamine degrading pathway. It's one of the lesser known ones.
Okay, fantastic.
Yeah. Then we can see our nutritional markers. Now, these are indirect markers, and they're what's being excreted in the urine. So I kind of take them with a grain of salt just because they're not showing us what's inside the cells. So I like to follow this up with looking at serum and red blood cell, white blood cell nutrient markers. But what we do see here is that the B6, the B5 are looking a little on the low end, according to this. Now, your B12, that one's an inverse marker. So B12, if this methylmalonic is coming back on the low end of the scale, it means your B12 should be pretty good.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Yes,
okay.
It does. Yeah.
So ones we're mainly looking at here for you are B6 and B5. B5 is necessary for energy production, hormone production, so the whole hormone cascade, even making cortisol. And B5 is part of that acetylation pathway I just mentioned that helps. It's a detox pathway, and it also helps break down histamine.
Okay.
And then B6 is part of the detox pathway, and B6 also helps with oxalates converting to glycine in the body. So that would be a really good thing for you with those oxalate variants that we saw.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, as I said, I do take. I don't know. I don't think I've ever taken B5, but B6 I do take. But I do sometimes feel a bit sick when I take methylated vitamins. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's where I'm going to go next. The rest of your markers on here look really good. Your detox markers are looking in range.
Okay.
So where I want to go next, and we'll kind of close with this, is just looking at your methylation genetics and seeing what we can derive from that.
Okay.
So I'm going to pause here and switch over to that report.
Okay, shall I switch over as well?
So that one will be in your, let me tell you what page that's on, because I've got to jump here.
Yeah, no worries. I mean, one of the interesting things about these reports is that you sent these over in advance, and obviously I had a quick look and I was interested to see what I could see. But it is quite hard to navigate these reports without the presence of an expert as well. It probably takes an awful long time to work out how to actually interpret these reports.
I can tell you I've been studying this for 8 years, Tony, and every day I learn something new.
Right. Yeah.
And this is one of my major practices. So I'm in the board of the Nutrigenetic Research Institute, and we're a research board that looks at genetics and chronic health. And then I present and train functional medicine practitioners in the use of genetics in their practices. And it's quite a specialty. I mean, it's like you've got to really be ready to devote a lot of time to studying this and sort of, enjoy geeking out on it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose science is changing so quickly. The amount of information you get develops so rapidly as well.
It's amazing. I mean, it's like drinking from a fire hose nonstop and always running to try to stay ahead. Because like I told you, 8 years ago, I was at 60, started with 60 variants, and now we're above 10,000. So that's an exponential growth here.
Yeah, that's mad. Yeah.
So what I'm finding really interesting here, looking at the genetics, your genetics, Tony, that relate to methylation, I don't see a whole lot of variance, which makes me wonder, when you're telling me you don't do well on methylated vitamins, if there's a functional issue again. Is there a cofactor missing? Have you ever had your homocysteine checked?
Yes, yeah.
Has it been elevated?
It's been very high. Yeah.
Okay. So then we need to follow that up and take a look at your methylation cycle itself. And there's a great lab that I'll send in my recommendations for you on that one also. And then, because you definitely want to get that, keep that homocysteine low. Yeah. We don't want that to stay high.
Yeah,
because
I worked really hard on getting it lower. Sorry to interrupt, but I think it came down from 14 to below 10. But I agree. Like everything I read suggests that one of the best markers for bad health in the future is high homocysteine levels. So that is not something that I want. Exactly.
So we want to look at C-reactive protein. We want to look at homocysteine. So those are important inflammation markers in general, and that could play into also what's happening there with your knee.
Okay.
So this is just how, this is a snapshot. I usually do this for, I do a case review prep for a new client, and then I do this for an hour and a half. So the case review is 75 minutes to 90 minutes, and we kind of go through everything in the history. So this is just a little snapshot. But just from this, we've gotten a lot of information and direction on where for you to go next.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's just so interesting. And I mean, the report that you sent, the genetic report, we've only touched on a few pages of it. There's so much there, electrical sensitivity, potential, copper and how you absorb it. There's just so much there. It's fascinating.
Right. The glutamine section I use quite a bit. And everything that relates to inflammation. So the iron pieces, the pieces that are involved in other factors of methylation. But there's also these control genes called KEAP1 and NRF2, NRF2. And there's these SIRT genes, SIRT, 1, 2, 3, and 4.
Okay.
And they're control regulators. So like if we think about a computer system that's giving directions, they're giving directions to how these genes express themselves. So in the genetic analysis, we have to move away from what's happening online, which is if you see an MTHFR variant, you take methylfolate. Well, that actually methylfolate's the last thing I introduce in my protocols because it can be overstimulating and it can trigger extra mast cell activation. So I've had people come in that were put on 5 grams of 5 milligrams of methylfolate, which is a lot.
Right.
And it's stimulating a lot of inflammation. So we've got to move back from that. Or if you have this variant, you have to take B12. Or if you have CBS, you can't eat sulfur. That's all not true. That's a very simplistic way of looking at it. We have to be looking at all of the upstream and downstream effects. And I've got a biochemistry map on my wall that I had the privilege to help make, that our research institute made. This thing is 3 feet by 2 feet and tiny type of how all of these genes and enzymes interact with each other. And that's how we have to look at this. And that's what makes it really effective.
And just on that methylation theme, when I first started working with someone a few years ago on, really functional health and methylation, I embraced methylated vitamins with a bit too much enthusiasm, and because I'd never taken them before, and I just felt the best I've ever felt for about 2 weeks, followed by the worst I've felt for about 2 months. I just felt nauseous every day, and I just couldn't shake it off, and that was clearly. My body needed it, but I was taking it at too fast a rate, and it was just kind of, whoa, detox. Don't know what to do with everything, but we're detoxing right now.
Right, and that's why we've got to bring things on board, the right thing at the right time, the right amount for that person. That makes a huge difference. So when we take these massive amounts of supplements or high levels of methylated vitamins, we're stimulating so many pathways and they're going down so many different directions. And it might open something up that feels great for 2 weeks, and then you hit roadblock. And then you can actually end up with toxin buildup in your body, or you're pushing toxins faster than your body can keep up with. And so that's where I see the wheels fall off for some people. But if we back it up and then take this really logical approach from a systems perspective of how all these systems fit together, that's very, very effective.
Beth, it's been so good to talk to you. I'm aware that we've recorded 2 podcasts now. I've taken a lot of your time up, and I massively appreciate it. I mean, what are the next steps that people could take? I've got a feeling that I will definitely want to work with you more on a personal level, so we can kind of talk more. I think it's fascinating for people to really get properly stuck into the nitty-gritty of what happens in these tests. So yeah, I'll definitely kind of, I'd love to work with you more on a personal level, but what can people do if they're kind of interested, and what would the next steps be?
Absolutely. Well, one, I would love to work with you too, Tony. And it's just a joy for me to help people turn their health around and get where they want to be with their health goals. And so if people are looking for help, just to go out to the website at mastcell360.com. It's MAST as in Tom, 360.com. And you can find out more information there. I have a free report that talks about the approach that I take, and it looks at the 7 most common root causes in mast cell activation syndrome and histamine intolerance, also most chronic health issues. These are the 7 most common root causes, and I'll step you through that. And that's at mastcell360.com/free report. And if you'd like to work with me, just go to the schedule link and book a case review. And if you have questions, you can go to the contact page and send us an email.
And I've already asked you about the book and your tip in the last podcast. I'm not going to ask you that again. But this whole thing, it is fascinating, isn't it? And I just wonder if, one of the issues with so much information is that it is quite easy to almost get a bit obsessive about all the information that we get, isn't it? Do you know what I mean? Like, we talked about the type A personality. One important part of the puzzle for me, certainly, is to look at all this stuff and then say, okay, I've got a few genetic variants and things aren't perfect, but now I'm going to go and watch a box set on Netflix and relax.
Exactly. We have to be able to put together an action plan that makes sense, that you can step through, and then, step away from it. Because if you obsess about your health all day long, that's another form of stress. And so find somebody, whether it's working with me or working with another functional practitioner who can guide you and is really a good fit, and who is going to put together a good program for you. And then just stick to the program and do what you can do. And it takes time, so people need patience. But if you have the right practitioner, the right approach, and you give yourself the time frame and put the work in, almost everyone, I would say 99% of people, are going to turn their health around.
Yeah. And just this specific area, well, certainly it does take, it's taken me a long time to figure out what's been going on with me. But actually, in terms of histamine, I know it's slightly different from mast cell, but that was pretty instantaneous for me. So you can hit on something quite quickly as well.
Some people get huge gains just with landing on the right food changes, and just bringing in a couple supplements. It depends on how long people have been sick and what they're dealing with. Yeah. But I do see people have huge gains within a month or two also, and that's always very exciting.
Good stuff, Beth. We're on the path to eating chocolate whenever we want to. And that is good news. Yeah. Thank you so much for coming on Zestology. I'm really, really pleased we met, and we'll no doubt speak again.
Thank you, Tony. I love we can team up and help people in this way.
Definitely. Oh, Beth, that's brilliant. I've stopped recording now. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're so welcome.
That's it for Zestology. Thank you once again to Beth O'Hara. I just think she's so awesome, and she's thought so much about her particular area of speciality, MCAS. I think that's how it's pronounced, rather than MCAS. I don't know, I'm such an amateur in this area, I don't really know. And histamine intolerance as well. And despite the fact that I feel like I'm a bit of an amateur, I'm definitely passionate about learning more and blogging about that journey, which is why I set up the website histamineintolerance.net. It's not even my main website, it's just a kind of side passion project, and I'd love you to check it out. And I also wrote a blog about Beth on there as well, because I think she's so great. Right, next week, I'm very excited to welcome one of America's leading experts on the health benefits and disease-fighting properties of wild medicinal spice extracts. He never gets colds or flu, and it's because of one little thing he takes every single day without fail, and all his clients take it as well. He is super keen on this one thing. But what is it? What's the one thing that means Mr. No Flu never gets flu? You will find out next week on Zestology. In the meantime, if you want plenty more on all this stuff, the kind of hacks and tweaks that I'm kind of trying out and testing on a regular basis, and the stuff that I find that works the best, you can go to tonywrighton.com, sign up for my 3 zesty things, or you can go to histamineintolerance.net and have a bit of a route around there as well. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.